Welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, I would like to discuss a little bit the factors of transitioning young unaccompanied minors to the education and employment system. I will do this at the example of Germany just because I know it best, but I think most things I'm going to say apply to most of the target countries of migration. In the other courses, we have already discussed the legal situation of young refugees and some of the social factors of integration, of basic social security, of inclusion in the wider society, and the importance of volunteer engagement and good interinstitutional cooperation. In this talk, I would like to point out some of the factors which have proven to be important for this transition process here in Germany. The first thing that we have to consider is that while the protection as a refugee is a right, the integration in host societies can be considered as a privilege. I will explain in a moment how I mean that. Countries like Germany, Sweden, France, Denmark are highly complex industrial societies. So being successful in these societies takes a lot of prerequisites. The educational pathways for the native population, but also for every newcomer, is really complex and long. And the clear expectation is that everybody participates in this society and lives from quite standard jobs. So there are pretty close ideas about what is a normal life in such a society. And even if you have every right to be here, the societal acceptance depends on meeting a lot of explicit but even more implicit expectations, norms, rules, and kinds of code of conduct that you have to know, consider, and internalize in order to be successful. And so please follow me through this presentation, and in the end I will try to describe some conclusions that you as practitioners in the field or future practitioners in the field might find useful. Germany is an industrial labor society. So here, and this is true for many other countries of the same position, the social position and acceptance is fully dependent on education and the status in the labor market. This requires a process of reorientation for many, which is not easy. You may want to look at the video stabilization factors, which we have linked here and will be available also on the learning platform. The main characteristic of the education and training system in Germany is a company-based dual system of training in more than 300 occupations. Germany is a high-skill economy, so there are long training periods, at least 3 years after initial school exam and occupational preparation. So the learning pathway into a standard German occupational exam for refugees, for people entering the education system as newcomers, is at least about 7 years. On the other hand, there are a lot of opportunities. There is a high number of training openings, not in all of the occupations and crafts, but in certain occupations in certain regions. Employers are looking for people who want to continue their butchery job want to become carpenters, want to go into elderly care and comparable occupations, particularly in the countryside where many young people tend to leave and there is a high demand for new labor. So the challenge is that while education in the state institutions is an entitlement also for refugees, training in companies is not entitlement, but the trainee has to be accepted by an employer. And to be accepted by the employer, the trainee has to be considered as acceptable, which means willing and capable to fill the position as an apprentice. Of course, there is also a sector of unskilled labor. This is about 25 or 30% of employment. Most of these jobs also require a quite good standard of German language and a good basic education and socialization. But these jobs are often precarious and depend very much on the business cycle. And most importantly, these jobs often will not make you enough money to have a good life, a good apartment, social security, and standard of living, and at the same time leave you money to be sent to your family. So societal acceptance of migration and management of migration depends on a consensus between the migrants and the host society that the integration into the labor society is desirable. Alternatives like unofficial or illegal ways of making money and or sustained dependency on social support systems will endanger the societal acceptance of migration as a whole. So the conclusion, both migrants and society must make a clear decision if they want what is necessary. But both are currently quite undecided. In the overview video about societal inclusion, we have already talked about some of these factors. So the interplay between social integration and the chains of education, the phases of stabilization in the new country, orienting about what you want to do here, the societal immersion and inserting, and the sequence between attending general school, preparation for employment or training, and the transition to employment. So I recommend to revisit this video to be able to contextualize the details that I will describe in the next minutes. The initial report of the project Cisotra describes more than 30 good practices which are connected to each of these phases, and you will find a lot of material there which illustrates interventions in all of these phases. So one of these interventions that is used with quite some success in the German state of Bavaria are so-called vocational integration classes. These classes have been set up in the last 4 years in the state vocational schools. Normally, these vocational schools complement the training in the companies for 1 or 2 days a week and are set up to teach general subjects like German, math, citizen science, and so on. But it's obligatory for all youths up to the age of 18 to attend them, also if they don't have a training placement. So these schools have been opened up to learners up to age 25 and a flexible program to adapt to the individual needs of learners without a proficiency in German and without much prior schooling is one of the ideas of the vocational integration classes. So these integration classes use the facilities of the regular vocational schools, but facilitate the transition to the regular system within school and to the apprenticeship training system. The vocational integration classes are set up in 3 different levels according to a prior assessment or initial assessment of prior learning and the individual competency level. The competences are built according to typical situations in dual training and employment. So, to a certain extent, the situation in real workplaces is replicated. And a guiding principle is that all learning should be relevant to future occupations and apprenticeship placements. The classes of German, so extra language lessons, also should build vocabulary and that's relevant for the occupational situation and should contribute to building relevant occupational competences. And the vocational classes should also build language competences. Another good practice, which is described in the Cisotra synthesis report, is the pupil refugee consultancy PUR. It's also partly described in the video on stabilization factors, which you find on our YouTube channel and in the learning program. This consultancy is located in the vocational school center. It is funded by the municipality. It employs 4 social workers and it's set up as open access social work. So it's not obligatory to attend, but the social workers just will be around in school. And their job is to accompany and support the youth on matters of school, training, housing, livelihood, how to deal with various institutions, and to help with everyday problems and challenges. One part of the consultancy is clearing and referral to other institutions and organizations, for example, those concerned with health, life support, recreation, sports, and so on. While the offices are integrated to the vocational school center, it's very important that they work independently and all consultancy is strictly confidential so that the youth can also feel comfortable to talk about problems in school and conflicts there without the fear of being punished for that or to have a disadvantage in grading or something. The office provides also intercultural training, social training, and training for the prevention of violence, as well as expert interchange with other actors and leisure time offers. So if you want to know more about these activities, there is an interview with the social worker in the video that's linked here on this slide. Another intervention to support the transition to the apprenticeship system is passgenau, which means about perfect fit. And this intervention follows the idea that if you were successful in obtaining an apprenticeship, the support shouldn't end, but should only gradually be phased out. So Kolping Training, important training provider in Munich, with the support by the municipal program for employment and qualification. The main insight was that there is a high demand for young skilled employees by the companies, mainly in the occupational fields of butchery, confectionery and bakery. And the focus of the intervention is to be a support to the businesses and the apprentices alike. So while versus the businesses, it's mostly about the intercultural opening of trainers there to raise awareness and understanding for the situation of the refugees, to give some background or give some hints and tips for how to deal with conflicts or even to mediate such conflicts. The measure also offers information, qualification, and individual support to the refugees used during the apprenticeship training. For the businesses, there is an advisory service during the apprenticeship training, support in finding appropriate new apprentices, so making a good match, sensitizing for the refugee subject, so keyword would be understanding of such phenomena like the problems of the escape, traumata, or intercultural factors. So the intervention includes training seminars for the companies, how to be a good trainer, about the legal framework, specificities in hiring refugees, and how to motivate the apprentice or meet their concerns or fear at some time. For the apprentice, there is advisory service during the whole apprenticeship training, and after that, application management and preparation for the theoretical and practical examinations. Also, the apprentices are consulted about intercultural communications, financial management, learning techniques, stress and time management. So, all of these life skills that you need to be successful in Germany. These are examples of official interventions by state-funded institutions. I want to take a moment to also speak about some examples of volunteer work which is related to the social aspect of educational and training and employment inclusion. We have in Regensburg quite big initiatives like the volunteer organization Campus Asylum, which includes about 300 student volunteers in 21 projects, which range from supported homework, additional lessons, sports programs, language learnings, bicycle workshop, common excursions, and also more and more the encouragement of refugee self-organization by bringing them on the board of the organization. So this is one of the most prominent organizations in this field in Germany. And this voluntary work and this communication between refugees and the resident population is considered as a very strong factor of the feeling of emotional welcome in the target country. Quite similar is the work group Foreign Workers AAA, which is the oldest initiative already since 1971, which works with 30 volunteers and traditionally mostly supported children by providing space for homework and supporting them in homework. But this activity has been expanded to older learners and apprentices as well recently. In the overview, I presented the idea of the need for an overarching strategy and coordination of this integration and transition process was emphasized very strongly. So I would like to give one example of such a strategy and coordination. The city of Munich, one of the premier cities in Germany, has developed an overall refugee integration concept, which includes the part sheltering and participation in the neighborhood, education and training, integration through consultancy, education and training and learning German, qualification and labor market access, and housing. Unaccompanied minors and refugee youth are covered from 16 to 25 years old, and the access to education is to be made universal and seen as a prerequisite for integration as well as for reintegration in the original countries. The concept presents a concept for a chain of education and training, as is mentioned in our overview, and covers the individual educational and training offers targeted as a sustainable integration in employment. So I want to spend a minute to describe and comment a little bit on the overview of this system. The process starts with the initial clearing of the overall situation and the educational prerequisites. So there might be a recognition of the general education and vocational training results, which allows for a direct entrance into the regular system. In more cases, there is language training needed as a preparation for the other steps. Then the next milestone is obtaining a school exam, which is often quite a challenge. Then the transition to the vocational integration classes, which I just described. And if this is successful, further general education and vocational education, so that also university pathways are accessible in some cases. In some cases, preparatory measures for obtaining an apprenticeship are needed to develop some specific vocational skills, and the main step is the vocational training for insertion in employment. For some graduates of these, but also, for example, for refugee academics, the direct transition to universities or advanced secondary school is also possible. The consultancy and support through Refugee Social Work, Information Center, Language and Employment, Youth Migration Services, commissioned actors of youth support services, which can be a wide variety of church and civil organizations, and services and volunteers is an accompanying element of the overall system. So we are almost at the end of this presentation, and in the last minutes I've gone in quite some detail about the measures and the work that has been contributed to this transition process from volunteers and official institutions alike. And so I want to share some more general reflections at the end of this talk. I think there is a growing consensus here in Germany that Germany is more and more a migration society, as we say, a society which is shaped largely by migration. This is especially true in the metropolitan areas. And while there are political controversies about the amount of refugees Germany should accept, this larger development is just a fact that we have to accept. This is a change for Germany, which has not perceived itself as an immigration country until quite recently. And change always brings tension and conflict. This is something that should be expected, and we can say that the conflicts and the tensions could be much greater. So all in all, I think things are running comparatively smoothly. This said, is that it's also, as we have seen in the discussion of the individual measures, integration and inclusion is not something that just is to be taken for granted. I think this is a kind of a liberal misperception, that it's something that has to be managed actively, where a lot of actors have to work together and have to be coordinated. One thing that has been forgotten in the great humanitarian effort that has been made in the last few years is that a concentration on the rights of refugees, on the social aspects, on tolerance, of anti-racism, is all very good and very fine. But in the end, I think there is a consensus in society that the requirements of a modern, democratic society must be met. We cannot compromise these standards because of migration. Therefore, we need to have a discussion that the inclusion of migration, and this is a learning also for many people in the host country, must have the target on inclusion also into employment, which means acceptance of the standards and success factors in a modern society. It requires the respect for the individual rights of the migrants, but also of the individual rights of the population which lives here for a longer time. So it's for sure a two-way process from which a new identity will emerge. For professionals and volunteers, this means we have to overcome this gap between a legal and ethic orientation of support and help, and have the clear message and have the tools and the strategies to smoothen this pathway into a modern society, into employment, but also into societal inclusion on the basis of democratic individual rights for everyone. The education system and the training system in our countries has to change to support this. We need to service for sure many more non-native speakers, and we have to service much older learners. It's a big difference if you start your learning when you're 4 years old or 5 years old, or if you attend school for the first time when you're 17, 18, 19. All of these people are as intelligent as the resident population. They just start the education longer. So we, in the future, we will have to educate and train more adults. And as we have seen, we have started to invent such a system, but we are not already there. I think the high engagement of the companies, in particular small companies, under the German system of apprenticeship is a pretty good start, and we hope to progress in this respect also in the future.